I work with a lot of babies who are 6 months and younger. And as you can imagine, I get a lot of questions about rolling because as babies learn to roll, it often has a significant impact on sleep. Sometimes it's a positive impact and hugely helpful. And then other times it feels more negative or challenging. Over the past year, I've had more and more families coming to me with 6 and 7 month old babies who are not yet rolling. And it has sparked my interest in learning more about this very significant milestone. I was very excited when our guest today agreed to come on to talk to us about all things rolling and some more. Dr. Kristi Hammerle of Year One Wellness is a pediatric physical therapist in Austin, Texas. Her area of focus is on the first year of life, so rolling is right in her wheelhouse. And I can't wait for you all to meet her. And as a reminder, everything that she shares today is not intended to be used as medical advice. It is purely educational. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Well, hey there, Kristi. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Helping our babies learn to roll can be very stressful for parents, and I hear a lot about it. So I'm excited for you to fill us in on all the things that we need to know about this big milestone, as well as other things in year one. And I'm also very interested in learning about how you chose this career and specifically this niche, because I think it's awesome that you work with kids in their first year. So let's start there. I would love to know what inspired you to become a pediatric physical therapist, and then why you chose to specifically focus on year one.
Yeah. Thanks, Allison. It's great to be here. It's kind of a mix of a couple different things. So, from a very young age, I was always drawn to the medical field, and both of my parents worked with kids. So, my mom worked with pre-K population. My dad is actually a high school life skills teacher. And, in all throughout high school and college, I worked with kids of all ages in various different roles, babysitter, camp counselor, vacation Bible school leader, tutor, stuff like that. And then, I eventually ended up choosing physical therapy. And so, I first worked as a pediatric physical therapist treating kids 0 to 21 years old. And it was actually because I was most uncomfortable with the infant population, really at first, that led me to start taking just a bunch of postgraduate courses, continuing education, and mentorships in infant development and what a PT needs to know to work with infants. And then I just loved it. I fell in love with working with the babies, working so closely with the parents. And then just how quickly babies recover and how much of a difference you can really make if you help them at such a young age with some of these things to prevent maybe issues that you might see later on if they didn't have any intervention. And now I just call babies all the time.
Babies all day, every day.
Hmm.
So obviously, I work with a lot of parents who have young babies, and I have a newborn sleep program where I'm meeting with the parents weekly. And so I hear a lot about rolling. And we have babies that come through my program who are rolling at 9 weeks. And then we have babies who still aren't rolling when they get into the 6 to 7 month old range. And I get a lot of questions about it. I kind of know what I view as when I typically have babies rolling. But as an expert, can you tell us what is the typical age range for appropriate rolling? For that would be appropriate for when to start rolling?
Mhm. I'll kind of tell you when I see babies roll at different ages and why they might roll at the different ages. And also, when I refer to rolling today, I might sometimes be referring to back to belly rolling, and then sometimes from belly to back rolling, because they're actually quite different with, what you need to do to be able to roll each direction. But I'll try to clarify. So really typical purposeful rolling I find happens between 4 and 6 months, where babies start to more consistently roll both back to belly and belly to back. Some babies get it a little bit earlier. Some babies you'll see, roll over right after birth or really in that newborn stage. And that's really kind of more of a reflexive roll, or, maybe they're on their tummy and their head is heavy and kind of pulls them over and they just flip. But it's not so purposeful. So really kind of that 4 to 6 month range. I like to see that by 6 months, babies are pretty comfortable rolling either direction.
Okay. And I actually find the early rollers, when we get these babies who are rolling before 2 months, that's nerve wracking for parents. And they're very anxious, particularly around sleep. What am I going to do if my baby rolls over and they aren't really strong? And when you're talking to one of these parents of an early roller, whether it's intentional or not, sometimes I think it's just the way the baby moves their body and they keep maybe accidentally ending up and rolling. But what do you recommend for them to do to help their baby, get stronger faster for rolling?
So development with babies happens, kind of in this head to toe pattern, this center of the body outward pattern. So really it's, the tummy time, of course, it's playing in an unrestricted space, whether that be on your back, on your side, on your tummy. In each position, you're going to work muscles against gravity a little bit differently. And so you're going to, after playing in all these positions, strengthen the muscles in the full body. So really, maybe you have a baby that rolls belly to back really early because they're not so stable on tummy time. But the more they spend time in that position, the stronger their arms get and the more control they will have over their head, be able just to kind of prop in that position versus always flipping. But really it's that unrestricted, floor play, out of containers, letting your baby just figure out how their body works and how their muscles can help them, through different movements.
And for the parents who have a late roller, so they're approaching that 6 month window and there's no signs of rolling, which I get plenty of these babies as well. I'm curious, what would be potentially the cause for a late roller that they may not be hearing about from, say, their pediatrician?
hmm A couple different things that I found when working with babies. One is you have those babies that are very tense from birth, and the tension doesn't really resolve on their own. So these are the babies that like to arch a lot. They might have had reflux. They like to stiffen or straighten their body, or maybe they always want to stand early. Those babies have such strong back muscles, and you really need good, strong abdominals, on the front and on the sides of your trunk midsection, along with strong back muscles, but you need a good balance of both. So a lot of those babies are, not activating the abdominal muscles that they need to roll over. So that's one pattern. Another pattern are babies with torticollis, and that is kind of an asymmetrical tightening on one side of the body. And, you might see a head turn preference, you might see a head tilt or head flattening with babies with torticollis. And those babies a lot of times have difficulty rolling because of their tightness, or they may only roll one way. And then you've kind of got your babies that maybe just haven't had enough free, unrestricted play on the floor. Maybe they spent more time in containers and they just haven't had enough time to build up that muscle strength and coordination needed for rolling. So those are usually kind of the typical patterns I see with late rollers.
Okay, so I'm getting the sense that some of it you think is they don't have enough independent free space play. Is that true? So what devices currently, we'll throw some devices under the bus here. What devices are people using a lot of? Like, I know we go on trends of things that are very popular.
Mhm.
Is there a trend right now that you're seeing where babies love to hang out in this thing, but
Mhm.
maybe they should be spending more time on the floor?
Right. Like babies love their bouncers, and their swings. And I think that those can actually be really useful tools if used in moderation, especially for parents to get stuff done and just be, humans and not be attached to their baby maybe all the time. But maybe an excessive or overuse of those, with a lack of being able to play on the floor, or in a pack and play, or just something that doesn't restrict down the limbs in the body,
Okay.
is what I mean by that.
And how much time a day do you recommend for that less restrictive play?
hmm So I think that, if you're kind of limiting container or device use to maybe 20-minute increments or so a couple times throughout the day, and then matching that to floor play, or, trying to spend a decent amount of baby's wake window on the floor, or at least practicing floor play once a wake window. I know those newborns don't have a lot of endurance during the wake windows, but maybe initiating some floor play, at least once every wake window, and as your baby gets older, gradually increasing the time.
Okay. And what about the babies who hate to be put on the floor? Not even just tummy time, but some just hate to be put down. We have that whole crew that wants to be held all the time. Do you have hacks for those parents?
So, one, babies that really, really hate tummy time, even with the modifications. So, your modifications might be, doing tummy time on the chest, or using a boppy under the arms, or a rolled up blanket under the arms to support them. Um, Sometimes those babies really have a lot of tension in their body and they're just not comfortable. So, maybe seeking out a provider who can address the tension. But aside from that, practicing making it a positive experience. So, of course, a baby's going to feel warm and cuddly, and they're going to love being held by you, and that's going to be their favorite. But when you do put them down on the floor, maybe start with frequent shorter bursts versus trying to make a big, long duration, a long bout of tummy time. And then getting down with them, keeping a hand on them, patting them, singing to them. Tummy time I found can be really successful sometimes when the babies are on the couch and you are sitting on the floor and you're face to face. They'll love looking at your face, trying to make eye contact with you, and just trying to make it very soothing. And then, once they start to be comfortable with it, then gradually increasing the time.
And I want to circle back to the tension concept. Do you find you mentioned colicky babies or reflux? Do you find that babies who have reflux or colic, or even if there was a traumatic delivery experience, are those babies more likely to have tension, or is it kind of random?
I find that those babies are more likely to have tension. So babies born, maybe needing vacuum or forceps assist, babies that are going through prolonged labor, prolonged pushing stage, or even babies, sometimes just born via C-section that don't have that time to kind of lengthen out, stretch out in the vaginal canal, can have more tension. And then definitely babies with reflux or gassiness, they just hold their bodies so tense all the time. So those babies, I feel like, definitely have more tension.
That makes a lot of sense. So,
Mhm.
one of the questions that several of my Instagram followers wanted me to ask you about was which should come first? Should they be rolling from back to tummy or tummy to back?
I've actually pulled this many times on my Instagram, asking what parents' babies have done, and I swear it's always 50-50. I guess half the babies roll back to belly, half the babies roll belly to back. What I see is that there are a good handful of babies that their first roll is really belly to back, but it's that more accidental or reflexive roll that we talked about. But with the true purposeful rolling, I think because babies spend a little bit more time on their back than on their belly, I'm seeing with the purposeful rolling, it's the back to belly roll first. But I don't think as far as development goes, it really matters which one comes first.
Okay, that's I think that's the important answer is you don't have a strong preference or think people should be worried about which one comes first.
No, no. As long as they're kind of in that typical window, of that 4 to 6 months, or maybe by 6 months, they're starting to roll both ways more purposefully. That's more what I hear about.
Okay. And I think every parent is encouraged by their pediatrician to practice tummy time for a variety of reasons. One of them being the rolling, the other being about the flat head, which we'll talk about that as well. But I'm kind of curious beyond tummy time, because we talked about some babies don't like tummy time. And then I have worked with parents who are like, we practice tons of tummy time and they aren't rolling. What are the best exercises to prepare for rolling? Is tummy time truly the best exercise, or is there something else you like better?
So tummy time's important. Don't get me wrong. Do your tummy time. It kind of all starts with strengthening the head and the neck, which tummy time will do. But there are definitely other positions that are important in rolling. So you want to have plenty of time playing on the back and even the side in that newborn stage, sideline play. But yes, so uh, to give you an example, to roll back to belly, you need really strong lower abdominals. And how a baby gets lower abdominal strength is by lifting their feet and starting to grab their feet, starting to put their feet in their mouth. And you're not going to be able to do that on tummy time. So, playing with the feet, definitely. Having your baby visually track or follow an object, turning their head from side to side, both on your back, so you can roll back to belly, and then also in tummy time. So in tummy time, having your baby try to follow um, a toy to where they might try to look over their shoulder, because movement follows vision with babies. So babies are very visually dominant. So where they turn, where they look, that's where they're going to want to go. So just making sure they have that full range of motion in their neck and they're practicing that skill. And then also, to help with that abdominal strength, parents can do little baby sit-ups or pull to sit with their baby kind of at that 4 month mark and beyond, which I feel like most parents usually know that activity that they may have seen on an app or, on social media or something.
So you're talking about just doing the little sit-ups where you're holding their hands and helping them sit up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yep. But activities like that, the grabbing the feet, the head turning, the tummy time, and then reaching. That would be my last thing. Reaching for toys when babies are on their back. So having the hands come together when they're on their back. And then on their tummy, reaching forward above their head for toys in front of them, because you have to get those arms out of the way when you're rolling from belly to back.
Okay. Yeah, I think on your Instagram one day you posted pictures of these little socks that would maybe draw their attention to their feet and make them want to grab their feet because they had some little things hanging down from them.
Yes, I love those to encourage a baby who's maybe not grabbing at their feet yet. Because one, it attracts attention to their feet, and two, they usually have little, toys hanging off of the socks that make it actually easier to grab. So,
That's awesome.
little assist. Yep.
So we talked a little bit about, if a baby really, really strongly dislikes tummy time, to potentially see a provider. And it's immediately made me think of my first daughter who hated tummy time. And we had a very traumatic delivery with 5.5 hours of pushing, and it was not good. And she was very, very fussy. So I think, oh, she probably had a lot of tension that I totally missed. And so when a parent feels like they're in that situation and you say maybe seek out a provider, are we starting with the pediatrician? Do we need a referral to see a pediatric physical therapist? Or I guess, how might we find one? Are we talking about chiropractors? Like, what are we talking about that can really help a parent who's listening to this and thinking, well, my baby hates tummy time. They have reflux. It makes total sense that they don't want to turn their head one way. If things are starting to click, what would you say is kind of the next step?
I would say, always be transparent with your pediatrician about what's going on with your baby. As far as seeking out a specialist, at least for physical therapy, many states allow direct access to physical therapy. So you can get on Google, you can ask your mom groups, you can seek out a specialist on your own and usually go visit them and get an evaluation directly. And so I think just finding someone that regularly works with infants that understands infant body attention or maybe postural asymmetries and milestones is a good place to start, or just if whichever provider that you align with that provides those manual therapy services that are going to help with the infant tension. Most of them you can see directly.
That's awesome.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so when we think of the rolling milestone specifically, how important is that milestone? Because I do think a lot of parents are stressed about it, particularly if you think you have a late roller. And I'm also curious, I feel like I've seen more late rollers since the pandemic hit, which I also kind of want to know if you have any thoughts on that. But how important is this milestone for parents to take action on?
So I will start by saying I do think it's an extremely important milestone to achieve. Now, if you feel like your baby is a late roller, I can't tell you not to be stressed, but just know that there's intervention that can be had that can help your baby with rolling that will put them on the path for success. You know what I mean? Um, it's an important skill for development because it develops all the abdominal muscles and helps with the trunk mobility that's going to be needed for crawling and balancing and skipping and jumping and things like that. So I do feel like it's an essential skill to gain. But, know that I see a lot of babies who are late with rolling, and we do a couple sessions of intervention and then they get the rolling down and everything else progresses typically, and they're well on their way. So it's important, but know there are things that can be done and that, it could very well be resolved, and maybe try not to stress out too much about it.
That's the advice of all parenting. Try not to stress too much. We try to tell ourselves that all the time.
I know, but I can't tell you how to feel. So, but know that there are people out there that can help.
Well, I think that's huge is just knowing their resources. I mean, there's so many things now with my girls being 8 and 9 that I have learned after the fact. I mean, this is going to make me sound like I live on another planet, but I didn't know that there were postpartum doulas that could come to your house and hold your baby so you could sleep when I had my kids. So I kind of put this in the same category of a lot of people I don't think know that there are people like you who are focused on that first year and have the skill set to help us do an intervention to relieve tension and to help our kids learn these important milestones. So I just think it's that can relieve stress, just knowing that there are people out here who can help. And, I kind of mentioned that there are many odd trends I noticed during the pandemic because I've been doing what I do for 6 years, and I feel like I've experienced more clients who have delayed rollers. Do you see any connection between the pandemic and delayed rollers?
I do. I do. And I think that that's probably coming from a couple different areas. First thing, stress in general. It was a stressful time for many different reasons for everyone. And babies do pick up on that stress. So, I think that babies who might be a little bit more stressed out have more of that tension, want to be held and don't want to be put down, have difficulties with breastfeeding. And breastfeeding is a factor that can help with motor development. And so I think that maybe stress was a factor. I think that maybe, more people were working from home, and maybe there was more container use just because that's what you needed to do to get through your day, right? um, and so I think kind of a combination of those things plays a little bit into, maybe your baby is a little bit later than they might have been otherwise.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to see how trends have kind of changed over the last 3 years. And another area that I've heard more about in the last 3 years is the weighted swaddles and sleep sacks. They've become very popular and now I would say also controversial. But I've worked with parents who swear that they changed everything for their child in the sleep department. And you know, I know that there's lots of views on them, and I'm just mostly curious from you about if you're seeing a link between babies who are using these weighted swaddles or sleep sacks and milestones being hit
Hmm.
or the flattening head. I guess I'm curious if you're seeing any trends that you see linked to that.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll kind of go on my spiel about all of this and maybe how it connects. And so I think that yeah, you're right. There's been a huge rise in products related to sleep, especially since the Back to Sleep campaign, Safe to Sleep campaign in the 90s. And whether that be certain cribs that help with sleep, or sleep suits, or different types of swaddles or sleep sacks. And because right, babies, their startle reflex, they're more startled on their backs than sleeping on their bellies as before. And so I will say that I think any of your PTs out there are going to say that we don't love anything that restricts movement. So knowing what I know about biomechanics and how babies develop and how movement is so essential, I can make the speculation that some of these products are causing delays in motor development, especially because a lot of babies do figure out motor skills in their cribs for the first time. A lot of babies will roll over in the crib for the first time, or sit up, or even pull to stand. So having something that restricts movement might take away the opportunities for them to practice that. But that's my physical therapy motor perspective. I totally understand that parents have a whole other set of factors going on in their life that they need to consider when picking out a crib or a sleep sack, or whatever it may be. Everyone needs sleep. It's essential for our mental health. So from my PT perspective, I don't love them. From a human being perspective, do what you need to do, but make an informed decision. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I usually tell people, and I don't know if you have a guidance mark where when parents come to me and they say this product is really helping, the Magic Merlin sleep suit being an example. And I'll say that's great. And I'm like you, if you got some relief and it's helping you get sleep and it's working for your family, great. I usually say between 4 and 5 months though, we really want to be done with it. And my big thing I say is we want to help them learn to roll. They're going to sleep. They're going to be happier sleepers once they're rolling and sleeping on their tummy. 99% of babies I work with end up being tummy sleepers as soon as they figure out rolling. And so that's usually kind of my cutoff when I work with families is like, let's get rid of any of the gadgets once we're in that 4 to 5 month window. Do you have a cutoff where you recommend people to kind of dumping the crutches?
Yes, that's a good point, right? Like maybe use those things, but only up until a certain point. I would say, yep, when your baby starts showing signs of rolling, so they are starting to lift their feet, they're rolling back to side, or, they're on their tummy and it looks like they might roll to their back at any second, um, then it's a good idea to try to start transitioning out, because you're right. We do want to promote the rolling, and babies, if they can end up rolling to their belly and figuring out how to calm down on their belly and sleep on their belly, it's safe if they get there on their own. And a lot of times they'll sleep longer and more peacefully. At least that's what I've seen. So yeah, kind of around the same timeline is when I start having those conversations as well.
Perfect. Yeah. So, one of the reasons sometimes people resist is they have a baby who's going back to tummy. And then we have that whole conversation of do I have to keep flipping them back or can they sleep on their tummy? And there's nervousness about that when the parent feels like, well, yes, my baby can go back to tummy, but they can't go tummy to back yet. And do they feel stuck? And so that makes parents very anxious, which I appreciate. My first daughter did the same thing and it made me anxious. But if you're in that situation and we're talking about let's break up with some of the gadgets, do you have a go-to exercise for helping a baby who is going back to tummy learn to go tummy to back so we can relieve the stress on those parents?
Mhm. Mhm. So before we get into the exercises, I will say that I think if a baby gets to their belly on their own and they are peaceful and they're not crying and they're sleeping, then I think let's maybe let them sleep in that position, right? Get kind of used to it. Or, maybe from starting tummy time at the very beginning, if you're doing tummy time and you're supervising your baby and they get a little bit tired, in the newborn stage, and they relax down into tummy time, let them relax there for a minute or two and kind of get used to what it feels like to not only be active in tummy time, but also relax in tummy time, which I think is important for a baby to do. But yes, so rolling a belly to back. So practicing the turning. So getting a toy, having them practice turn because they're going to have to look way over their shoulder to get all the way to their back. Reaching forward in tummy time. So putting toys above their head and helping their arms straighten out to get those toys. They've got to get their arms out of the way to roll onto their back. And then building it into your routine to roll them in and out of tummy time, even from really early on when you're practicing that. So when they're on their back, help their little legs and body turn over onto their belly. And when they're on their belly, kind of scoop up their body and help them roll onto their back, just to get them used to what that movement feels like.
Yeah, the sensation of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. We've talked about turning the head, and I'm gathering that that's a really important aspect is head mobility. And so tell me kind of your thoughts on that. And you mentioned torticollis. I definitely work with kids who they say, well, they'll only roll one way, or they are very tight and they only want to turn their head one way. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
So, as I mentioned before, development happens in this kind of head to toe pattern. So, neck mobility and head strength is really one of the first most important skills that a baby can get. And like I said before, too, development is very vision driven. Where your baby looks is where they're going to go. So, if you have a baby that has a head turn preference, they will likely be more comfortable just rolling that direction. When it comes to reaching, they have a head turn preference one way. They might be more comfortable using the hand that they're always looking at and kind of forget about the other hand. And along with, you've got your head flattening that is paired with a head turn preference or a torticollis. And a head turn preference or torticollis is almost always the number one cause of infant head flattening. So it's very important for a baby to be able to have full range of motion both directions, and not only have good range of motion, but actually be sleeping with their heads turned both to the left and right, really about 50-50. So if it kind of looks like, oh, my baby can turn their head both ways, but they're still preferring to keep it one way all night. There's probably some tightness there that you might just are not seeing or haven't recognized yet. So super important for full neck mobility, neck range of motion.
Okay. And
Mhm.
this is my ignorance, but is this something they can outgrow on their own, or it really should be treated?
It really should be treated. So, sometimes a mild head turn preference they can kind of outgrow, but most often if there are asymmetries, if there's a tightness in the neck or one side of the body, it doesn't spontaneously stretch. You really have to do purposeful stretches and activities to get those muscles where they need to be and the strength where they need to be too. It's also it's pretty time sensitive. So the earlier you get started with a baby doing the stretches and exercises, the faster they're going to resolve. Sometimes even waiting a month or two can really add to the total treatment time it takes to resolve a torticollis or muscle tightness. So I would say that this is something that you maybe don't want to wait on.
So, how early might someone be able to take action on it?
So, I mean, you really can start. I work with babies that are very young, weeks old. You really can start at any time. If you feel like your baby is really having an asymmetry or a tightness in their neck or their body, or they're starting to get some head flattening, which is a good indicator that there's a tightness. The earlier the better. There really isn't an age that's too young if there's a true tightness that needs to be addressed.
And I'm not ever trying to throw pediatricians under the bus, but sometimes I think we assume our pediatricians know everything about everything related to the babies. And I find that about sleep. And then part of the reason I went into what I do is because I found out pediatricians only receive 3 hours of training on sleep. And so they're not sleep experts, they're not nutrition experts. And the more pediatricians I talk to, they're pretty forthcoming about that. They're generalists and they're really focused on general well being and obviously treating illnesses, et cetera. And so, do you find that this kind of falls into that camp where we as parents are assuming our pediatricians are going to spot that our child is tight or they have a head turning preference, or in kind of the more harder scenarios, they say, oh, that's normal, they'll outgrow it. Do you find that that is the case, or do you feel that pediatricians have a fair amount of training in this area?
With something like a head term preference, I find that a lot of times the parents are recognizing it first because they're the ones looking at their baby all day long. This is something that you kind of gather over time. And so, you're going to your pediatrician visits and they're short and they have so much to look at. So maybe they're not recognizing it at first. And, come the 2 or 4 month appointment, or sometimes even later, when the head has gotten pretty flat, when they've heard over and over now, no, my baby really is only liking to look to the right. They've got this big tilt now. That's maybe when it's more recognized in those visits. But if you take a dive into the medical history, you're finding that this has been there the whole time. And if you look at your pictures, back from when your baby was born, if you go through your camera roll, you start to see, oh my gosh, yeah, their head was turned this one way the whole time. So I
Right.
think that really getting an evaluation done with a musculoskeletal expert who really understands the patterns that babies have and how torticollis and head flattening works together and how it affects breastfeeding and all that is warranted. So, but I find the parents will notice it first because they're the ones looking at their babies all day long.
That makes total sense. And that's the other thing is the pediatricians, they have to turn things quickly in those wellness appointments. So unless the parent is, catching it and bringing it up, then they don't even really have time to catch it. So I think this falls into the category of so many things for our kids, for ourselves, where we really need to be an advocate for our kids and kind of take the next step if we think they need to be evaluated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do you recommend someone find a physical therapist in their area if their pediatrician doesn't have a good referral?
So I think that social media can be kind of a good resource these days. Even reaching out to maybe a specialist that works with infants that might not be in your state, they might be able to put a shout out there to find other therapists. Your Google search and your mom groups. I think your mom groups are going to be a really good resource. You can look up early intervention websites and look up therapists on there. But I think that probably mom groups are going to be a good resource, and because really a lot of babies do have these issues, and I think a lot of babies are seeing specialists. So chances are there's someone out there that knows a little bit about what you're talking about. There's also, torticollis Facebook groups. There's Facebook groups for just about everything too. So looking on there and asking for a preferred provider in your area.
Awesome. And can we talk about online consultations and how that works? Because you offer some online consultations, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So for
Yes.
people who literally don't have anyone in their area, they could potentially receive help online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I can provide online consultations. So, if you have questions, if you need someone to do a screen of maybe what your baby looks like, what might be going on, and then refer you or help you find more information in your area, giving you general things that you can work on to help promote development and maybe help to release some of that body tension with some general activities and exercises on your own. We can definitely get started, at least get all of your questions answered, and talk about what you can do in the next steps moving forward, depending on your situation, depending on if you have resources there or not.
Awesome. Well, this has been super helpful. I'm curious If there was one thing you wish all parents knew when it comes to kind of that first year of development and hitting milestones, what is it that you wish everyone knew?
Well, first of all, like aside from therapy and baby development, just I think spending that time appreciating the stage that you're in, doing your skin to skin and bonding with your baby in whatever way that means to you is going to help them with development light years, maybe more than you think. And then, maybe more from a specific physical therapy developmental standpoint, getting them on the floor, playing with them on the floor, limiting those containers or devices to only when maybe you really need to. And then trusting your gut. If you feel like something's off with your baby, if you feel like your baby has that tension, or you're seeing the milestones look a little funky, just to advocate for your baby, reach out to a specialist. I think all of us that work with babies want to help, and knowing that there can be help found usually with someone, and maybe reach out to your PT first, but you're having breastfeeding issues and they refer you to people that you need, and they also work with you, but just trusting your gut.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here today. Can you tell everyone how they can find you?
Yes, you can visit my website. So I am the owner of Year One Wellness, a therapy practice that works with infants. So that's year1wellness.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Year One Wellness. And, I provide services here in Austin, Texas, but I also have an online baby class and provide virtual consultative services as well. So, reach out to me, send me an email through my website, and I'd be happy to chat about anything.
Fantastic. Well, we will link to all of that in the show notes. Thanks again, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Allison.
Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.